We all know Kiran Bedi as India's first female IPS officer. We know her as someone who's blazed many trails as a figure of strength. Later, of course, she became a controversial politician, especially during her stint as the LG of Puducherry. But this week, the News Minute and Newslaundry published an explosive story. It was an investigation which took many months. This showed how Kiran Bedi, as a police officer, abused her privilege and mounted a surveillance operation on her daughter. Kiran Bedi was worried that her daughter was running possibly an illegal but definitely an unethical visa racket. This is why the Delhi police resources were used to mount the surveillance operation. This happened 20 years ago, and you may wonder why tell the story now. It's important because there are two things to note. One is how our police resources are being wasted. And second, during this investigation, we found something very important. That a horrific crime happened in Delhi in 2003 while the surveillance operation was going on. And we believe that there was a lead which was not followed upon. We'll get into that. Of course, we'll not tell you the entire story. You will have to go to the News Minute or the Newslaundry and read the story. It is behind a paywall. You have to pay rupees 500 a month or take any other kind of subscription to read the story. This is important because to do investigations like this, we need resources, we need our best talent possible, and to continue, we need your support. So I'm going to introduce the two people in the studio with me. One is Sumedha. She is the reporter, one of the reporters who were on the story for months and months, and Nikita Saxena, who is the editor of the story. So I'll start with you, Nikita. How many months of work was this story? Many, many months, right?
Yeah, I think with a story like this, because you're also trying to justify to the reader, like you rightly said, why are we looking at something that is essentially a private familial conflict 2 decades later? You want to make sure that you're looking at everything as carefully as possible, and the reporters have already done so much of that work. And more than anything else, you want to be sure that this is in public interest, that this is not a story that we are doing because it's salacious. This is not a story that we're doing because we think we want to get into the private lives of Kiran or we want to get into the private lives of her daughter. It's a story we're doing because we think that there is clear instance of wrongdoing here. That a police officer should not be able to conduct a surveillance operation that, as far as we know, did not have any authorization, simply because they are a concerned parent, that the daughter of a decorated police officer should not be able to get away with a visa racket that, as far as we can tell, was at least, like you pointed out, unethical and probably also tethering the fine line of legality without facing any consequence. And most importantly, that if there is a lead that turned up as a result of this surveillance operation when phones were being tapped, it's very concerning that this lead was not followed upon and that there may have been a miscarriage of justice because this lead was not followed on. So I think most of our focus was kind of on trying to make sure we were understanding and presenting those points as clearly as possible.
So the story basically is based on emails and tapes. These are tapes which basically Delhi police tapped the daughter, whose name is Saxena, and her partner, whose name is Gopal. And these are tapes of their conversations with each other and with other people. So we're talking about hours and hours of tape recording and emails which were leaked and we accessed. So Sumedha, tell us, how did this whole thing happen? You had to transcribe all the tapes and then you stumbled upon the illegal visa racket?
I think I'll start from the beginning, that the biggest challenge was that when we had got access to those tapes, the biggest challenge was to get a tape recorder, which is like finding, which is like a rare thing in Delhi. So I remember I had gone visited all the markets in Delhi, and then we had got a tape recorder from Chandni Chowk, and then I used to sit and play those tapes, and because those tapes were from 20 years ago, so they were a lot of places the voices their voices was cracking, so it was tough to so you had to listen and re-listen whatever they were saying, and you have to be very sure that whatever you're transcribing is absolutely right. And then and because it was I think about some 40 hours of tapes, and therefore the transcription itself took like months. So
imagine the reporters have had to listen to tapes, and more reporters were involved in this. They've had to transcribe every single line, and then someone else has to listen to it again and make sure it's fact checked. Then a third person goes and fact checks. I don't know how many fact checks we've done.
Yeah, and the other challenge was to match the voice. So for that, we had got the forensics done.
Yeah. So this is a story which we are doing with complete responsibility. We are not simply taking somebody's tape and saying this is their voice. This has been given to a forensics lab in Germany, and they have given a certificate for one of the tapes that the voices do match that of Saina Bedi and of Gopal Suri, the hotelier who was her partner at that time. What exactly was the racket that they were trying to run?
So as far as we can tell, and like Sumedha said, and like you pointed out, there were a huge number of resources even dedicated to making the story happen, right? And so one was the number of reporters who were involved. All of them are listening to all these tapes, which are quite long. I think even for the forensic analysis to happen, they had to obtain Saina's voice is still available publicly. A reporter had to call Gopal to be able to make sure that they were obtaining an audio clip that could then be used for the forensic analysis. The bulk of the visa scam is clear from the emails that we were able to access as well as the tapes. And this is what we've been able to understand. Saina and Gopal were in a relationship. This was in 2003. It is possible that it was also happening before, but the material that we have pertains to that year. And they were essentially, and we're talking 20 years ago. So 23 years ago. Yeah, so more than 2 decades ago. So we're talking about a time when, going abroad meant a whole different thing than it does today. So I just also hope that the listeners will be able to kind of take themselves back to that time of bureaucracy, and it's bad enough today, but from what we can tell, Saina and Gopal were doing a number of things. One of the things that they were doing is that they were telling people that they can facilitate their visa process. Perhaps they were expediting it, perhaps they were just sort of helping them push the documents into the embassy.
So per se, a private party helping someone with the visa process is not illegal.
No.
Because we have a lot of private parties doing that. Here the illegality was that they were also in contact with embassy people and perhaps paying them, right? That's an assumption.
That is the material that we are getting, and not just from the tapes where Sumedha correctly, yes,
as well,
where they seem to be talking about paying off certain people. The most important part here is you shouldn't trust us when we say that it was illegal. Trust the decorated cop. In emails that we have seen, Kiran has expressed clear concerns about the visa scam, not only because they may have been paying people, but because they were possibly using her name and Saina was using her credibility to sort of build a lot of connections. And the name of India Vision Foundation, which is a not-for-profit trust that Kiran runs, and Saina was then a part of and continues actually to be in a very senior position in.
So as Nikita pointed out, that they were doing a number of things, and so one of the ways was there was this one call in which they were discussing about supplying women to diplomats to get visas for their clients. So it was like really, and this is also supported by the emails we have got access to.
What we're trying to say is that in the emails, Kiran Bedi herself calls this illegal when she uses a lot of words for the operation.
She calls it human trafficking.
So I want to come to that now, where Kiran Bedi herself is saying she's not supportive of it, right? But before that, I want to tell something to our audience. I hear a lot of people complaining, saying investigative journalism is dead in India. Where are the investigations? Who is doing it? This is investigative journalism. There are organizations continuing to do. Nikita used to be with Caravan. She's done excellent investigations with Caravan. Sumedha did last year, this year on... it's called the ballot trail. She has followed 3 constituencies where fake voters were made, of voters were deleted. The News Minute, my organization, has done several investigations. So don't ask that question again. Is investigation journalism dead? It's very much alive, but it is your duty to keep it alive. And like a robot, I will keep reminding you, click on the story, read it. You will hit a paywall after 4 or 5 paragraphs. Do not hesitate. Click on that. Go subscribe. Going back to both of you, Kiran Bedi says at many points that I am not supportive, right? I'm not going to divulge everything in the story, but there is a point where they do reach out to newspapers and consulates and embassies saying that Saina and Gopal are running this racket. I am not supporting them. Kiran Bedi can turn around and say that, look, I did send this notice. So what was wrong?
I think we could not trace any complaint and any official complaint which was registered. A police complaint which was registered about on her daughter, about her daughter running visa business like this. And the other thing is, I mean, how can you use public funded state resources for your own personal matters? That is clearly, I think, unethical for me.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear, and we've tried to make this clear in the story as well. This is a conflicted mother at her wit's end, right? This is a mother who's found out something that she's very troubled by, and I'd like to empathize with that. But there's an issue here. You put out the complaints and you say that yes, there's something wrong that's happening using my name, using the name of IVF. We do have some source confirmations on the fact that these notices did make it to newspapers. The question here is, if Saina was not Kiran's daughter, what would happen then? I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves. One, like she pointed out, if her mother was not a police officer, perhaps she would not be surveilled, wiretapped, followed as she was. But secondly, if she was not a police officer's daughter and she was doing this, and we seem to also find from the emails that they were not returning the money of their clients in some cases, would they not face some legal consequences if there was a complaint that was filed?
Okay, so you have to read the full story to understand what these tapes said, who was involved, because there are lots of police officers involved in this case. These were, there was one ACP, one DCP. We believe that there were several other cops, at least 3 more, who were aware of what was happening and perhaps contributed to it. You have to read the story to know the names of these police officers. Now we move to the second part of the story, which in my mind is perhaps more grave, which is there is a rape of a Swiss diplomat in Delhi in 2003. In one of the emails, there is a mention from a police officer that Gopal speaks about this rape.
Yeah.
Right? So what does a journalist do when we know that, okay, Gopal is speaking to somebody on the phone and he says there is a rape, has somebody been questioned, he takes a name. We are going to ask the investigator of the Swiss rape whether such a lead was passed on to him. We asked him and he said no.
Yeah.
That rape case still today remains unsolved. It was the biggest manhunt that Delhi saw. According to him, around 10,000 people were questioned at that time, but nobody was eventually arrested for that crime. So that's one important part of our story, right, Nikita, where we are saying that this came up and what happened to it.
I think to me that is what escalates the story from being one of individual impropriety, which is that it does seem from the material we have that Kiran did perhaps. Now, we don't know whether the surveillance operation was authorized or not, but it does seem that she used the help of her colleagues in the police to surveil her daughter, which is individually that's not a great look for Kiran. But then you reach the level at which the email that you're talking about, which I do hope the viewers will read, makes a very specific claim, right? Which is that in the course of this tapping, they find a conversation in which the assault is mentioned, in which there is a person who is asked if their name has come up in reference to that investigation. And we're talking about a sexual assault case that was very horrific. All of them are, but also one that, because of the kind of attention it got, had a huge number of police resources that sort of were devoted to the case, right? And like you said, the fact that the investigator, one of the main investigators of the sexual assault case, is telling us that he was never made aware of this lead, I think that really escalates the seriousness of everything that was happening in that time for me.
But I don't think the Delhi police will be very welcoming of the story, considering it shows that their resources were misused.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly wrap up by going back to the process of investigative journalism, right? Because for a lot of people watching, they're going to read the story, I hope. And but the rest is, they have to understand how the process works. So you talked about how you had to listen to the tapes for a long time and then also go through the emails. How was going through the emails?
I think all I can say, it was tough, because at that time it was. It was also like really mentally. It was not. It was not. It's not the laborious part of the story which tires you, but I think it was also very emotionally draining. When you're so young and you're going through all these tapes and reading these emails, you feel like you cannot trust anyone, because in this story, everybody is accusing each other of the most
bizarre things.
So that was one aspect. The other aspect was the corroboration, and which I if because I think this story, when Nikita was editing this story, she will keep asking us that, how do we know this? How do we prove this? There's just only one email. We have to make sure that we are not insinuating anything. So there has to be multiple emails to back this one claim, and
like every single claim to the audience. The Nikita is such an editor that for every line she'll have 5 questions.
Yeah.
And you're drained by the time Nikita finishes editing.
And I think one thing I've learned from Nikita is that how to be a meticulous reporter, because I remember I was in ACJ when I had read her profile on Anjana Kashyap, and I was like, I think it was a big thing for me to work with her, and like I have learned a lot.
Do you feel old and senior now, Nikita?
No. I feel very much in awe. Like I feel like they had to go through, and Dhanya sort of really captained the ship along with and really sort of, really marched us through as it was required. But we're looking at a vast amount of material, and it's not just, it is laborious and it is emotionally draining. And it is true that I think even when you're looking at the material as not the primary reporter, your sense of reality feels completely distorted. It is something that to me is kind of unimaginable. And the other thing is that you also feel a certain amount of fatigue, right? And that's what you have to keep guarding against. Because when you go through these emails and you go through these tapes so many times, you're constantly nervous. Like we're sitting here today and I am really nervous. I think the biggest thing I'm worried about is if, despite all of these checks, what if we've gotten something wrong? And that's terrifying. And that's the thing that keeps you awake at night. And that's why you're going to go look at that email for the 50th time.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what the process is about. It's not all these like exciting, you wake up and there's a scoop and it's done. It's actually just really slow, painful work, and that's the job.
It's not like how it's shown in Bollywood movies, but
in fact, one of India's leading investigative journalists, Josie Joseph, was once saying, I remember in a panel that we were, that being an investigative journalist is perhaps one of the most lonely jobs, right?
Yeah.
Because for weeks, months, and perhaps years, you're looking at documents, or whatever, you're talking to your sources. You finally finish your story. For 1 or 2 days, people will celebrate the story. Even the Kiran Bedi story, people read for 2 days, 3 days. Perhaps if the Swiss government asks for action, it'll go on for 2 weeks. But then everybody forgets it, right? Then starts the trouble of legal cases, defamation, going to court, and then your cycle of trouble starts again. And
your hunt for next story.
Yeah, of course, the hunt for the next story. But I think we have already hunted down quite a few stories, and they will be coming out one by one. This is the first in this year for me. 2025 is where I have kept ready story 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. So hopefully it will all be done. Do read these stories and remember that Sumedha, Nikita have put their names forward in the story and worked on it despite knowing all the risks, right? You are pissing off Delhi police, Kiran Bedi and a lot of other people. But we are ready. We are ready to face the consequences because we understand that this work is important and we have to ensure that these stories are told in the right way and they have to be factually correct and tight. So that's what we have done. Do read the story. It's on the News Minute and Newslaundry websites. Do write to us and tell us what you thought about the stories. Thank you, Sumedha, and thank you, Nikita. And it's not just Sumedha. So many reporters have worked on the story. In fact, the byline is also of Anand Mangnale, who has spent months. In fact, he was the one who made sure that he reached out to the cop who investigated the Swiss rape.
Yeah.
And that very important input, right? That cop did not know about this particular phone conversation. There are also other reporters who work like Parth. He was doing the fact check. And that's very important in an investigative story, to go through the facts again and again. Oishika and Yogi, who also gave a lot of input. So it's been teamwork. And that kind of work is what brings together a story of this magnitude.